The battle was already lost. The last remnants of the human fleet struggled against the overwhelming force of the Galactic Dominion, their warships burning in the void like dying embers. Admiral Kane gritted his teeth as he watched another destroyer explode, its crew lost in an instant. They had fought with everything they had, but the enemy was too strong. The Dominion's dreadnoughts moved with terrifying precision, cutting down human vessels one by one. It was only a matter of time before the Resistance was wiped from existence. Aboard the Dominion's flagship, High Marshal Torvex observed the battle with cold amusement. The humans had put up a decent fight, but they were weak, outnumbered, and doomed. He leaned back in his command chair, waiting for the final moments. Soon, humanity would be nothing more than a forgotten chapter in galactic history. Then, it happened. Without warning, space itself seemed to twist and shatter as something emerged from the darkness. A warship, unlike anything seen before, appeared on the battlefield. It did not come from hyperspace, nor did it register on any scanners. It was just there, as if it had always been, lurking in the void. Its hull was black as midnight, absorbing the light around it. No insignia, no markings, no transmissions. For a moment, both sides hesitated. Even the Dominion's war-hardened officers stared in stunned silence. The strange vessel did not match any known design in the galactic database. It was not human. It was not Dominion. It was something else entirely. Then it moved. The Phantom warship, because that's what it felt like, a ghost of the void, shot forward with impossible speed. Its weapons, invisible to the eye, unleashed pure devastation. The nearest Dominion dreadnought took a direct hit. There was no explosion, no burning wreckage. The massive warship simply ceased to exist, its entire structure vanishing in an instant. The Dominion fleet scrambled to respond, but the Phantom warship was faster. It weaved through the battlefield like a shadow, striking without warning. Admiral Kane's crew watched in disbelief. Their sensors couldn't track the ship. Even the Dominion's targeting systems failed to lock onto it. It was as if the warship wasn't real, but the destruction it left behind was very real. High Marshal Torvex's smug expression disappeared. He barked orders, demanding that all weapons focus on the unknown ship. Hundreds of cannons turned toward the dark vessel, unleashing a storm of plasma fire. But nothing hit. Every shot either missed or phased through the ship, as if it weren't truly there. In the span of minutes, the once invincible Dominion fleet was in chaos. The Phantom warship moved with deadly precision, eliminating key targets, breaking formation after formation. The battle that was supposed to be humanity's final defeat was now turning into something else, something unnatural. Then, as suddenly as it had arrived, the Phantom warship vanished. No hyperspace signature, no trace. One moment it was there, tearing through enemy lines like a nightmare. The next, it was gone, as if it had never existed. Silence fell over the battlefield. What remained of the Dominion's fleet hesitated, unsure of what to do. Fear spread among their ranks. They had come expecting an easy victory, but now something unknown had intervened, and it had chosen to fight for humanity. Admiral Kane exhaled slowly, his hands shaking. He didn't understand what had just happened, but one thing was clear. The war was no longer just between humans and the Dominion. Something else was out there, something powerful, and it had just changed everything. You said the Galactic Dominion had ruled space for centuries, crushing all opposition beneath the weight of its endless fleets. Every species that stood against them had been wiped from existence. Their war machine was unmatched, their dominance unquestioned, until humanity. The war had raged for years, brutal and unforgiving. And now, it was finally coming to an end. The last human fleet, battered and broken, faced its execution. Admiral Kane stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, his knuckles white, as he gripped the command console. The holographic display before him painted a grim picture. Hundreds of Dominion warships surrounded them, their energy signatures bright against the void. His own fleet was barely holding together. Shattered hulls, failing shields, desperate pilots calling for reinforcements that would never come. The end was here. A voice crackled over the comms, filled with static and desperation. We can't hold them back. Their dreadnoughts are targeting the command ships. Kane clenched his jaw. He had known this moment would come. He had prepared himself for death, for the destruction of the last human fleet. But knowing it didn't make it easier. "Admiral," one of his officers said, his voice shaking, "the Dominion is broadcasting a message." Kane exhaled slowly. "Put it through." The display flickered, revealing the cold, reptilian face of High Marshal Torvex. His golden armor gleamed under the light of his warship's control room, his piercing eyes filled with amusement. "Admiral Kane," Torvex said, his voice like gravel, "it is over. Your resistance was persistent, admirable, even. But you know as well as I do that this battle is already won." He leaned forward, his expression turning cruel. "Surrender. Perhaps if you beg, I will spare the remnants of your kind." Kane stared at the Dominion commander, feeling the weight of every lost world, every slaughtered colony. He could hear the distant echoes of screams, the ghosts of those who had fallen to the Dominion's conquest. His people had fought with everything they had, and now they were expected to kneel. He took a breath, steadying his voice. "You think we'll surrender?" He shook his head. "You don't understand humans." Torvex chuckled. "No, I understand your kind very well. You fight because you are weak, because you fear the inevitable." He gestured to the battlefield behind him, where Dominion ships loomed over Kane's forces like wolves circling wounded prey. "Your people are out of time, Admiral. This is the final hour of your pathetic rebellion." Kane opened his mouth to respond. And then the universe shattered. A ripple tore through space, silent and absolute. The stars themselves seemed to bend, light distorting as something appeared in the void. It did not emerge from hyperspace. It did not transmit any signal. It was simply there, a warship unlike anything ever seen. Its hull was pitch black, darker than the abyss, and it absorbed all light around it. No insignias, no markings. It had no shape that made sense to the eye, as if its form was shifting, adjusting to something unseen. It was massive, but there were no known records of such a ship. Silence fell over the battlefield. Every Dominion officer froze. Their scanners detected nothing, as if the ship wasn't real. And yet there it was. Then it moved. The Phantom warship did not accelerate like a normal vessel. It glided forward, faster than anything should be, and before anyone could react, its weapons fired. No beams, no missiles, no explosion. One of the Dominion's largest dreadnoughts vanished. No debris, no wreckage. Just gone. Panic erupted. Dominion warships scrambled, trying to lock onto the Phantom warship, but their targeting systems refused to acknowledge its existence. Their weapons fired blindly into the darkness, hitting nothing. On the Vanguard, Kane's crew was just as stunned. His scanners showed no readings from the ship, no power signatures, no mass displacement. It was a ghost. Then the comm channels erupted into chaos. "It's attacking again." The Phantom warship streaked across the battlefield like a specter, obliterating another Dominion capital ship in an instant. More ships followed, collapsing into nothingness as the ghostly warship carved a path through the Dominion forces. On his flagship, Torvex shot to his feet. What is this?" His hands clenched the armrests of his throne-like chair, his confidence replaced with something he had never felt before. Fear. The Phantom warship did not speak. It did not transmit warnings, demands, or threats. It simply destroyed. Admiral Kane watched in awe. "My God, what are you?" The battle that had been humanity's last stand had suddenly shifted. The Dominion, so certain of their victory, was in full retreat. The Phantom warship tore apart the strongest fleet in the galaxy in mere minutes. And then, just as suddenly as it had arrived, it was gone. No hyperspace jump, no energy signature. It simply vanished, as if it had never been there. The Dominion forces, now leaderless and terrified, broke apart. Some fled into the darkness, others surrendered outright. The war, it seemed, had changed in an instant. Admiral Kane sat in stunned silence. His officers whispered among themselves, voices filled with disbelief. The impossible had happened. A warship that should not exist had just turned the tide of battle, and nobody knew whose side it was truly on. The aftermath of the battle left the void eerily silent. Wreckage drifted across space, remnants of what had once been the Dominion's mightiest fleet. Scanners showed fleeing enemy vessels, their formations broken, their commanders shaken. The battle was won, not by strategy, not by human resilience, but by the arrival of something beyond comprehension. On the bridge of the Vanguard, Admiral Kane sat motionless, eyes locked on the space where the Phantom warship had disappeared. His crew remained in stunned silence. The adrenaline of survival still pumped through their veins, but none of them could ignore the same gnawing question clawing at their minds. What just happened? A comms officer broke the silence. Admiral, reports are coming in. The Dominion forces, they're surrendering. The ones who haven't already fled are transmitting distress signals. The officer hesitated. They're terrified. Sir. Kane exhaled, rubbing his temples. They should be. He looked at the tactical display. 14 Dominion capital ships erased. No wreckage. No debris. Gone, as if they had never existed. No known weapon in the galaxy could do that. No ship could move the way the Phantom warship had. What are we dealing with here? His XO murmured, barely above a whisper. Nobody had an answer. Kane rose from his chair, shaking off the weight pressing down on him. They had survived, and for now, that was enough. Get me fleet-wide comms, he ordered. The officer nodded, activating the channel. Across the remaining human warships, battered but victorious, the Admiral's voice rang out. This is Admiral Kane. We have survived. His voice was steady, unwavering. The Dominion is retreating. They will remember this day, not because of us, but because of what appeared here. I don't know what that ship was. I don't know why it came. But what I do know is that for the first time in this war, the Dominion felt fear. A ripple of murmurs spread across the bridge. The idea was staggering. The Dominion, an empire that had conquered thousands of worlds, an empire that had never once known terror, had run. We're returning to Outpost Echo for emergency repairs. Gather survivors, collect what data you can, and let's move. As his crew scrambled to follow orders, Kane's mind remained fixated on a single thought. That ship wasn't ours. So whose was it? 3 days later, Outpost Echo, one of the last remaining human strongholds, was alive with activity. Engineers rushed to repair damaged warships. Medics worked around the clock to treat the wounded. Soldiers who had expected to die in that last battle now wandered the station in stunned disbelief. The war should have ended with their annihilation. Instead, they had been given a second chance. In the command center, Kane stood before a holographic display, watching replays of the Phantom warship's appearance. Every attempt to analyze the footage failed. No energy readings, no signals. It was as if the ship existed outside the known laws of physics. Sir, his XO called, stepping forward. We just received a transmission from the outer colonies. Kane's brow furrowed. From whom? The XO hesitated. That's the thing. It's not from anyone in our systems. The signal is unknown. Chill crept down Kane's spine. Put it through. The screen flickered, static crackling, before an image took shape. It wasn't a Dominion officer. It wasn't human. It wasn't even a face. It was a symbol. A sigil, ancient and unfamiliar, glowing faintly on the display. A voice followed, distorted, alien, yet somehow understandable. You were never meant to win this war. The words sent a shiver through the room. Officers exchanged uneasy glances. The voice continued, calm yet carrying an undeniable weight. Fate was set. The Dominion was inevitable, and yet we have interfered. Kane's fists clenched. Who are you? For a long moment, silence. Then the voice spoke again. We are the Forgotten, and your war is no longer your own. The transmission cut off. The display went dark. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Kane turned to his officers. Get me everything we have on that ship. Every scrap of data, every trace of energy. I want to know what we're dealing with. The room snapped into motion, officers scrambling to compile reports, engineers scouring through battle records. Kane's eyes never left the darkened display. The Phantom warship had appeared from nothing. It had obliterated the Dominion's mightiest fleet, and now some unseen force had claimed responsibility. Who were the Forgotten? And what did they want? That night, across Outpost Echo, murmurs of the Phantom warship spread like wildfire. Some believed it was humanity's last hope, a weapon from an ancient civilization, awakened to aid them. Others feared it was something worse, something beyond their control. In the observation deck, a lone technician sat, staring out into the void. His shift had ended hours ago, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. Not after what he had seen. His gaze drifted across the stars. He should have felt relief. Instead, all he felt was an unease he couldn't explain. Then something moved. His breath hitched. A shadow, deep in the void. For a moment, he thought it was a trick of the light. But then, there it was. No lights, no signals, just an outline against the distant stars. The Phantom warship, watching, waiting. And then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. The lights inside Outpost Echo flickered for a brief moment before stabilizing. Deep within the station's command center, Admiral Kane stared at the darkened display where the transmission had ended. His officers stood frozen, processing the words they had just heard. We are the Forgotten, and your war is no longer your own. The phrase echoed in Kane's mind like a warning, or perhaps a declaration. Sir, one of the technicians finally spoke, voice uncertain. Should we respond? Kane exhaled sharply. How? The transmission had cut off as abruptly as it had arrived. Whoever, or whatever, the Forgotten were, they clearly didn't want a conversation. They had given humanity a message. Nothing more. No, Kane said finally. Monitor all frequencies. If they send another signal, I want to know immediately. The crew snapped into motion, relieved to have orders. But Kane knew that monitoring wouldn't bring them any closer to the truth. His gaze shifted to the holographic battle replay still hovering above the command table. The Phantom warship had arrived from nowhere. It had turned the tide of battle in seconds. Then, just as suddenly, it had disappeared. Kane had seen many things in his lifetime. War, betrayal, the extinction of entire colonies at the hands of the Dominion. But never had he encountered something that defied explanation. He turned to his XO, Commander Lauren, as our intelligence division found anything new. Lauren shook his head. Every scan we ran came back. Empty. No heat signatures, no propulsion trails, no power source. It's like the ship isn't bound by the same physics as the rest of us. That answer didn't sit well with Kane. Then we're missing something. Lauren hesitated before stepping closer. His voice dropped lower. Sir, what if we're not meant to understand? Kane's jaw clenched. He didn't believe in fate. Didn't believe in things that were beyond human comprehension. Everything in the universe had rules. If something appeared to break those rules, it only meant they didn't have enough information. Yet deep down, a part of him wondered, what if Lauren was right? Before he could respond, the station-wide alert blared. Incoming vessels DTCTED. High velocity. Unknown origin. Kane's stomach twisted. Not Dominion. Not human. Get me visuals, he barked. The screen changed, showing the vast emptiness of space outside the station. At first, there was nothing but the usual star-speckled void. Then, movement. 5 ships. They were sleek, almost liquid-like in design, with surfaces that didn't reflect light the way normal metal did. They seemed to shimmer in and out of sight, as if they weren't entirely in this reality. "Sir," a lieutenant whispered, "those aren't Dominion ships." "I can see that." Kane stepped forward, watching the way the ships moved, too smoothly, too silently, not like anything human engineering could produce. Not even Dominion technology was this refined. Then the realization hit him like a hammer to the chest. The Forgotten. Before anyone could react, the comms crackled. Humanity. The voice was the same as before, distorted, yet perfectly clear. But this time, it wasn't a recorded message. This time, it was live. Kane straightened. "This is Admiral Kane of the Terran Defense Force. You have entered a restricted military sector. Identify yourselves." Silence. Then, "We are here to correct an imbalance." A chill ran through the room. Kane's fingers tightened into fists. What imbalance? The ships outside stopped, hovering just beyond the station's weapons range. The voice responded, emotionless. "The war should have ended. The Dominion should have won. Yet you still stand." Kane's blood ran cold. "You wanted us to lose." Another pause. Then, "Your survival is anomalous." That single word sent a ripple of unease through the command center. Anomalous. Like humanity wasn't supposed to exist. Like something had gone wrong. Kane's heart pounded. He had spent decades fighting for Earth's survival, battling against impossible odds. But never, in all that time, had he considered the horrifying possibility that the war had been predetermined. And now, these entities, the Forgotten, had arrived, not to aid them, but to correct the course of history. Kane's voice was steel. "You're saying we're a mistake." For the first time, the voice carried the faintest trace of curiosity. "You persist, despite all calculations, despite overwhelming force." Then came the most chilling words yet. "You were not expected to adapt." Kane's breath caught. His mind raced through the countless battles humanity had fought against the Dominion. They had been outgunned, outmatched, but they had endured. Was that what the Forgotten hadn't predicted? Had they expected humanity to simply break? Outside, the 5 ships began to move again. But they weren't attacking. They were observing. Kane forced himself to stay calm. "You didn't just come here to tell us we should have lost. So what do you want?" Another silence. Then, "We will see." Without warning, the 5 ships turned, accelerating at impossible speeds, and vanished. Gasps filled the command center. Kane's fists remained clenched. The Forgotten had left. For now. Hours later, Kane sat alone in his quarters, staring at the reports scattered across his desk. None of it made sense. The Phantom Warship had saved them. Yet now, its creators had come forward. And they weren't allies. A low chime sounded at his door. "Come in." Lauren stepped inside. "Sir, you're not going to like this." Kane gestured for him to continue. Lauren hesitated, then handed over a data slate. "One of our deep space probes picked up something. A massive energy signature. But it's not Dominion." Kane frowned. "Then what is it?" Lauren exhaled. "It's the same signature we detected when the Phantom Warship appeared." A heavy silence settled between them. Kane gritted his teeth. The Forgotten were preparing for something, and humanity was right in the middle of it. The battlefield was frozen in eerie silence. Where once the Dominion had moved with relentless certainty, now their fleet hung in space, motionless, powerless. The Phantom Warship stood at the center of it all, a silent executioner casting judgment over the battlefield. Inside Outpost Echo's command center, Admiral Kane barely breathed. Every sensor, every scan, every desperate attempt to analyze the ship yielded nothing. The warship defied logic. It shouldn't exist, and yet it was deciding the fate of the war. The Dominion Supreme Commander, Warship, was silent on the comms. The arrogance was gone. The certainty had melted into something Kane had never expected from the Dominion's most feared leader. Pure, unfiltered fear. And then the warship moved. It didn't accelerate like a normal vessel. It didn't adjust its trajectory with engines or maneuvering thrusters. It simply was somewhere else. One moment it loomed in the distance. The next, it hovered directly above the Dominion's command dreadnought. And then the dreadnought began to disintegrate. There was no explosion, no weapon fire, no energy surge. The massive Dominion warship, once the pride of their fleet, came apart at the seams as if the very atoms holding it together had decided to let go. Decks unraveled. Superstructure dissolved. Crew members vanished before they could even scream. Within seconds, the Dominion's flagship was reduced to drifting particles. A fleet killer. A ship that could erase an enemy without firing a single shot. Kane felt the weight of the moment settle into his bones. The Forgotten weren't just another faction. They weren't just another military force. They were something else. Something beyond human or Dominion understanding. The Dominion forces began to retreat. Not tactically. Not strategically. They fled. Blind panic overtook them. The Dominion, once so sure of their absolute dominance, now ran like prey before a predator they could neither fight nor comprehend. For the first time in Kane's long career, he saw Dominion ships colliding into each other in their desperate attempt to escape. Their formations dissolved into chaos. This was no longer a battle. It was a slaughter. The Phantom warship did not pursue them. It simply existed. Then the voice returned. That deep, hollow voice that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere at once. The war is over. Do not return. And just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. No hyperspace jump. No sensor signature. Nothing. Kane's hands clenched into fists. The Dominion had been shattered in a single night, not by human forces, but by something far greater. And yet, why had the Forgotten intervened? Why now? What did they want? Lauren exhaled sharply. Sir, what just happened? Kane didn't have an answer. But he knew one thing. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. The silence that followed was deafening. The Dominion fleet had been shattered, their ships either drifting lifelessly or fleeing into the dark. The Phantom warship was gone, vanishing without a trace, as if it had never been there at all. And yet, its presence still lingered. Admiral Kane stood in the command center of Outpost Echo, staring at the holoscreen filled with wreckage. What had just happened was beyond comprehension. A war that humanity had been losing, a war they had no hope of winning, had ended in a single night, not by their own hands, but by something far more powerful. The Forgotten. But why? Kane turned to Commander Lauren, who still looked dazed by the events that had just unfolded. Status report. Lauren snapped out of his stupor. The Dominion fleet is in full retreat, sir. Some of their ships are still disabled, but they aren't regrouping. They're just running. The great Dominion ascendancy, the most feared empire in the galaxy, was running like frightened children. Any sign of the warship? Kane asked. The comms officer shook his head. No, sir. It's gone. No jump signatures, no sensor echoes. It's like it was never here. But it was here. It had spoken. It had judged. It had chosen to act. Kane clenched his jaw. Get me a line to High Command. They need to know what happened here. Lauren hesitated. Sir, what do we even tell them? That was the problem. How did you explain the impossible? Kane exhaled. We tell them the truth. That humanity didn't win this war. That the Dominion didn't lose it. He turned his gaze back to the holoscreen, watching the last of the Dominion forces disappear into the void. We tell them. The war ended because something far greater decided it should. For the first time in history, humanity had survived not by their own strength, but because something else had intervened. And Cain couldn't shake the feeling that the Forgotten had not done this out of kindness. They had sent a message, not just to the Dominion, but to everyone. And that meant only one thing. This war wasn't truly over. It was just the beginning of something far, far bigger.